Despite some Republican complaints about after 2020 about the length of time it can take to count ballots, Georgia's election board today approved a controversial new rule to require hand counts of all ballots at polling places. The vote was 3-2, backing the proposal were three allies of the former president. Now, critics have said the requirement could stretch out and introduce chaos into the vote counting process, that is, if it even passes legal muster. CNN Sarah Murray joins us now with the latest. So explain what happened today.
Well, what we saw is the Republican majority on the state election board push forward this rule change that would go into effect in October against the advice of the Secretary of State, against the advice of the Republican Attorney General, against the pleadings of bipartisan election officials across the state. And essentially what it does is it says that after you've conducted this whole election workers, you've been awake all day, you need to hand count the number of ballots that have been turned in. You need to compare that to the number of ballots that voting machines say were cast and compare those two numbers. And so there are a lot of concerns about this from the perspective of statewide election officials and local election officials. One is, they've been working all day. Hand counting paper ballots is not a perfect science. Usually the machine count numbers are better, and that you have a chain of custody issue with these ballots. So the view of voting rights experts and election experts is that this could just inject a lot of chaos. It could delay figuring out who won the state. And, we've seen in the past, the longer it takes to count, the more we have these kind of conspiracy theories fester.
So what happens next?
So what happens next is sort of a question of who is going to sue and when. And there's a statement today after the meeting from Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger that sort of hints at that. He says Attorney General Chris Carr has stated that these rules would not withstand a legal challenge, and I have worked every day to strengthen Georgia's election law to ensure our elections remain safe, secure, and free. It would not be the first time the state election board has been sued as a result of rules they've passed just this year. They're already in court over a rule regarding election certification and saying state or local boards can conduct their own reasonable inquiries before they certify the election results. So I expect we're going to see more lawsuits. And Anderson, I think what's really important about what we saw in Georgia today is this is sort of an early glimpse, a preview, if you will, of the kind of stuff we're going to see in the run-up to and after November. We have a lot more folks who are election skeptics that are in positions of overseeing or even administering elections. And so there's just a lot more of this that's still to come.
Yeah, Sarah Murray, thank you. Joining us now, CNN political commentator Jeff Duncan, the state's former lieutenant governor. He also testified before the grand jury in the Georgia election interference case. First of all, just your reaction to this hand count rule in your home state, because this is what a lot of election deniers have been pushing for, saying it should all just be paper ballots and hand counted. Obviously, there's often more human error in hand counting ballots than machines.
Yeah, this newly reconfigured state election board, they got their way. They've been carrying Donald Trump's water for months now, ankle biting at solutions in search of a problem. And today they injected the ultimate asterisk mark into our November election. They are able to change laws to follow conspiracy theories instead of reality. And it's unfortunate, and we're in this juxtaposed because even if these lawsuits come forward, then the MAGA crowd is going to scream, and Donald Trump's going to be the chief cheerleader, saying they didn't get a fair opportunity to run a fair election. So it's really a difficult spot. I once again call on Republican leadership from every corner of the state, county, city, state, legislative, even the governor's office, to call on this as loud as absolute possible, that this is a horrendous idea, and it usurps democracy in its ultimate format.
We should also just point out, the election in Georgia was free and fair, and there was no widespread voter fraud. So, all these conspiracy theories are just, they've been looked at, they've been examined, there's nothing there. Fast forward to election night this year, what would this new process mean for Georgia's count in practice?
Well, it would slow it down, and it would inject a human element to it, which once again is really the secret sauce to these conspiracy theories, is doubt. They've planted the ultimate seed of doubt, and it would just open up for opportunity and delay the actual count and the verification or certification of the election process, which time is your enemy in elections. You want to get the votes in crisp, clean, counted, and registered as quickly as you can to eliminate any sort of doubts or improprieties. But look, these guys aren't interested in winning this election fair and square, and that's by putting a good candidate forward that can actually win. There's no reason why a Republican candidate for president shouldn't be way out in front in the state of Georgia. 8 statewide constitutional officers are Republicans, strong majorities with Republicans in the legislature. The only time a Republican loses in Georgia is when Donald Trump puts his fingers on him. We have 2 U.S. senators to prove that case.
The Atlanta Journal-Constitution reports that according to a recent survey conducted by the paper, sizable majorities of Democratic and independent voters in the state believe the election will be fair and accurate, but less than half of Georgia Republicans expressed such confidence. Even with this hand count, if the former president loses in the state, do you think Georgia Republicans will accept that decision?
Well, they're going to have to. Once again, he will have led the losing team. And my hope, look, Anderson, this whole thing from day one for me is not about trying to get popularity. It's about trying to fix the Republican Party. And it needs to start here in Georgia. We are broken at our core as Republicans here in Georgia. We have a state party that is dysfunctional and only solely worships one person and one person only, and that's Donald Trump. He could say jump off a bridge and they would do it. He could say rig an election and they would try to do it. That's exactly what's happening with the state election board.
So assuming this is going to be challenged in court, do you think it will be overturned in court?
I'm not an attorney. I don't even get to play one on TVs. My hope is it is. My hope that it quickly is overturned and allows the laws in place, because the realities of this, we're so close to the actual election day. And there just makes no sense to do it. I don't want any doubt. And look, if Donald Trump wins this state, so be it. It is what it is. I'll accept the results and move on. If Kamala Harris wins, then the other folks on the other side should accept the vote and move on. We need to move on as a country. We need to move on as a party from this hyper chaotic period of time that we find ourselves in.
Jeff Duncan, thanks very much.
We're also following another story that could have serious implications on the election in Georgia. The state's Republican-controlled election board just ruled to require that ballots cast on Election Day be hand-counted, a step that could delay the results from the battleground state. And notably, Georgia's Republican Attorney General previously warned that board that this controversial move is likely unlawful. Let's get the latest from CNN political director David Chalian. David, you perhaps more attentively than most are eagerly watching election results as they come in. How could this reshape the way we see those votes come in Georgia?
So let's be clear, Boris, even before this rule change in Georgia was passed by the election board, the likelihood that we were going to have an actual result to the election on Tuesday night of election night, very low. Right? It's just, if you look at the 7 battleground states that are going to decide this race, Georgia being one of them, and you look at how they count their votes, there are several, Pennsylvania, Arizona, even Wisconsin sort of goes into counting into Wednesday mornings. Unlikely that we would have a result. But now it becomes even more unlikely because hand counting is a slower process, right? And so obviously there are politics behind this decision, right? Because this is tied to Donald Trump's election lies in 2020. This is all a response to that, because remember, Brad Raffensperger, the Secretary of State, the Republican Secretary of State in Georgia, who Donald Trump infamously called and said, find me the votes. He was removed from this election board by the Republican-controlled legislature at Donald Trump's urging in the aftermath, when he was still is pursuing that lie about the 2020 election. So now we have an election board that has 3 Trump-supporting allies and 2 that were opposed to this, and they were able to change this rule. As you note, the Attorney General says in the state this is probably going to be impermissible. Clearly, there's going to be legal action. But if you have to hand count the ballots that are cast in person on Election Day, that is going to take a longer time, and it's one of the 7 states that will decide the election.
We saw in 2020 the dynamic known as the red mirage, the idea that Republicans were going to hold this huge advantage early on in counting, and then eventually, as more ballots were counted, that would sort of dissipate and the race would be more competitive. Is this part of an effort to sort of grab the narrative before we know the definitive results?
So I don't know the answer to that. Sure. I don't know that is the answer. Clearly, that is part of the larger conversation inside how the parties are assessing how these votes are going to be counted. But by the way, in some states, there was a red mirage. In some states, there was a blue mirage. Yeah. It depends how each state counts their votes. What we do know are Democrats tend to vote in greater numbers early and absentee. Republicans tend to vote greater numbers in person on Election Day. So you could imagine if you have to hand count the in person on Election Day, some of those Republican votes, it'll take a little while to get counted. And if all you're looking at are Democratic early absentee votes, you may have a not fully accurate picture of what is going on in the state as the votes are coming in on election night. Obviously, lots of Democrats vote on election day too,
Right.
but that is the pattern that we see, and that could have an impact.
Yeah, we have to keep a close eye on this one because, as you noted, there's likely legal action to come. David Shalin, appreciate that update. Thanks so much.
What does this tell you, David, about how the Trump campaign is getting involved this late in the campaign in trying to change various rules, whether in Nebraska or Georgia for that matter?
Yeah, no, look, I think this is a very close election. I think it's going to be a very close election. And as Scott suggests, they're trying to get every advantage. What's interesting about the situation in Georgia, where we had 3 audits of the 2020 election, which all said the same thing. You have a Republican Secretary of State, presumably backed by a Republican governor, who is at odds with these Republicans on this election committee. So that tells you something, and hopefully the courts can resolve this situation.
Yeah, I think I'm sympathetic to arguments on both sides in Georgia, actually. I think some Republicans believe it would instill more confidence in the vote count, but I'm also sympathetic to the idea that it may, change the process and may also face this legal challenge. So I actually think people on both sides of it have something important to say.
Can I just say one thing? There was a hand count in Georgia of these ballots, and it validated the machine count. The reason most states went to a machine count was because machines are more efficient at counting ballots.
I think the interesting point is that both sides do think that there is an election integrity thing associated. Republicans will say a hand vote is just going to be more accurate. And to your point, Democrats are saying, no, there's room for error there. It's going to delay the vote and so, doubt on the election.
Because if they have to hand count all those ballots, that's going to take a long time.
Yeah, I think, and nobody's looking for a repeat of what we saw in 2020. And most of the states have made their systems more efficient in terms of preparing for that. But this could definitely throw a wrench in the works.
It was interesting. I thought the Georgia Republican Attorney General and Republican Secretary of State both say this move won't withstand a legal challenge.
Yeah, I'm not a lawyer, so couldn't speak to it, but obviously they would know. And I do. Obviously, there is going to be a legal challenge, and so I guess we'll have to see how the courts sort it out. But I think all of this that we're talking about today, you just ought to, if you're watching this and wondering why is all this happening, this thing is like a few hundred or a few thousand votes, a knife's edge type of election. So everything that you think you can do to get an advantage, whether it's in Nebraska or Georgia or North Carolina or Pennsylvania or anywhere else, both of these campaigns are trying to pull out every stop right now.
It's that close. You think so too?
Oh, I do. I think this is a coin flip election right now. That can change, but it really seems like it's on that track.
Very close by all accounts. How do you see it?
For sure. And we even look at the strategy where we see Walt going to Asheville, North Carolina. If that's a strategy to, chip away some of those red counties surrounding Asheville, that's a thing that, typically Democrats haven't been visiting those states. You look at Donald Trump going to New York City. That's also an effort to bring in those Connecticut and New Jersey people who he typically wouldn't see in the tri-state area.
All right, Congresswoman, on another very sensitive issue in Georgia, the Georgia GOP-controlled election board, as you know, is now requiring ballots cast on Election Day to be hand-counted, potentially delaying results, not just for days, but maybe for weeks. Why do you think they are taking this step?
Well, it is a play from the same Tower playbook. They lost in 2020 and changed the rules. We had our majority-making Senate runoffs. They lost again, and they changed the rules. Republicans don't know how to play fair. Donald Trump already tried to overturn the will of the voters in Georgia, trying to find 11,780 votes. But Wolf, we play by the rules, we win, and then Republicans try and change the rules. This is the same thing. They want to sow doubt in the election process so that when he loses once again in battleground Georgia, they can say, well, it's because the numbers didn't match. It's because of this. And they want a lengthy hand count of every single ballot in this battleground state because they see the writing on the wall. Donald Trump is going to lose once again, and they want to put doubt in the mind of voters of if this was a fair and free election.
So will Georgia Democrats, Congresswoman, bring a lawsuit to stop this?
Well, if we are already involved in lawsuits in the state of Georgia around election certification, we are going to continue to do everything that we can to ensure voters that when they show up to cast their ballots, Georgia Democrats will make sure that those votes are not only counted, but certified. This is the bare minimum. This shouldn't be something that is partisan. This is the bare minimum because we're not just talking about Democratic votes. I want all votes counted, Wolf. I want Democratic votes counted, Republican votes, and independent and unaffiliated votes. I want all votes counted. And I call on my Republican colleagues to stand with me for free and fair elections and count every vote and certify them. It's as simple as that.
Representative Nikema Williams of Georgia, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Wolf.
Good evening, and thanks for joining us. I'm Boris Sanchez in for Caitlin Collins. A battleground state election board just made a move that could upend the entire election if that rule change stands. We're talking about Georgia, where Vice President Kamala Harris stumped today, where Donald Trump narrowly lost in 2020 and then demanded that election officials find him votes, ultimately leading him to criminal charges. Now, 4 years later, new concerns are emerging after the pro-Trump majority on Georgia's election board voted today to force counties to hand count all ballots on Election Day, despite objections from the Republican Secretary of State and Republican Attorney General warning that might be illegal. The three Republicans on the panel got a very public shout out from Trump himself last month.
We have to make sure that we stop them from cheating because they cheat like dogs. I don't know if you've heard, but the Georgia State Election Board is in a very positive way. This is a very positive thing. They're on fire. They're doing a great job. 3 members, 3 people are all pit bulls fighting for honesty, transparency, and victory. They're fighting.
Now those 3 so-called pit bulls, according to Trump, made a move that some are warning could disrupt or delay the whole certification process. The vote was 3-2, and one of those 2 who voted against the change joins us now. Let's go straight to the source with the only Democrat on the Georgia State Election Board, Sarah Tindall Gazelle. Sarah, thank you so much for sharing your evening with us. You remember it took about a week in 2020 for that hand recount of every presidential ballot in Georgia. From a practical standpoint, what is this going to mean in terms of figuring out who wins?
Well, first, it's a little bit different from that, the audit. What the rule that we passed tonight requires is that the actual ballot papers are counted. They're not doing a hand tabulation. So it shouldn't take days, but it certainly will take hours. And in the aftermath of 2020, our legislature set incredibly tight deadlines for reporting the actual tabulation. So if counties haven't uploaded their vote totals by midnight, they're out of compliance. They have violated state statute. And this rule is going to make it incredibly difficult for counties to do that. So we're really setting them up for failure.
Do you anticipate this is going to wind up in court? And do you think it could be adjudicated before Election Day?
I would not be at all surprised if it winds up in court. I certainly hope it would be adjudicated. Courts need to be expediting all election-related cases right now, and it was certainly made clear to us, and this is something I argued initially because as the only attorney on the board, I understand the scope of our authority, and this goes way beyond it. So I expect it will be sued over it, which is what our chair had warned everyone. But I'm hopeful that the courts will see fit to be done with it quickly.
Sure. You sort of alluded to this a moment ago, but I was hoping you might expand on it. The new rule was proposed by someone known for peddling conspiracy theories about election workers. Do you think the election denialism from 2020 and Trump's lies about it ultimately influenced this board?
Literally every single petition that we have heard and we have passed has been brought to the board by somebody who denies the 2020 election results. That is the only thing motivating these rules. This is not the standard rulemaking process. That should be deliberative. That should involve the election administrators themselves. It should involve our attorneys. That's not how any of this happened.
Sarah Tyndall Gazelle, we have to leave the conversation there. Appreciate your time.
My pleasure.
My political sources tonight, former senior advisor on Hillary Clinton's 2016 campaign, Karen Finney, and former senior advisor to Mitch McConnell, Scott Jennings. A pleasure to share this evening with both of you. Karen, how big a concern is this for the state of Georgia, one the Democrats clearly think they can win?
Yeah, it's a big concern in Georgia, but I think we have to take two vantage points on this, having done elections in Georgia. This is a strategy designed to sow chaos. That, we will have lawsuits. There will be a lot of back and forth in the coming weeks. We have 46 days to the election. Ballots have already been printed, all of that. One of the concerns is you can't even train ballot workers in time on how to do this. And there's lots of concerns about what's the chain of custody of the paper ballots. There's lots of issues here. So that's a separate issue. The larger issue is, again, sowing chaos, because part of what they were doing was giving themselves the authority to delay certifying the election. And what that means, that throws not just Georgia into chaos, but the whole election into chaos. It also provides a rationale potentially for Donald Trump, something I think we all believe he will do anyway, to claim that there was a problem with the election. I mean, on the debate stage, he said, our elections are a disaster, right? So it's a way to create, if people are seeing stories that there was some problem in Georgia, right, it's a way to throw the whole thing into chaos like he tried to do in 2020 and just basically slow down the system and buy himself time as he tries to fight it out again. So yes, there's a Georgia-specific problem, but it also creates potentially a national problem.
Scott, we know someone that doesn't like it when these vote tallies take too long. Let's watch.
I think it's a terrible thing when ballots can be collected after an election. And I don't think it's fair that we have to wait a long period of time after the election. I think it's terrible when we can't know the results of an election the night of the election in a modern day age of computer.
It seems like 4 years ago, Trump didn't like this idea. What do you say to Karen, who argues that Republicans are opening up an opportunity to sow chaos?
Oh, I think hand counting 5.5 million ballots would take a very long time. And I mean, I'm only moderately good at math. 5.5 million pieces of paper sound like a lot to me. And so I understand the concerns about the logistics of it and how long it would take and what that could do. So I suspect that's why when this gets sued and it goes to court, a judge is, there's probably a strong possibility they're going to say, look, we're too close to the election to try to implement something like this. On the other hand, I will just say, I do think there are Republicans in Georgia who do want more certainty in the outcome of the ballot counting, and they want to feel like there are as many eyes on it as possible to give them, the people of Georgia, the most confidence they can have that everything was counted properly and so on and so forth. So I don't want to cast any aspersions on the motives here. But it does strike me that the logistics of this would make it difficult. They did some other things too to increase, confidence in the election, which are probably fine. But counting 5.5 million ballots, it's hard, by hand. And the machines, they're pretty good.
Yeah, I was just going to say, actually, this week I had a briefing on Georgia and was able to look at some internal data that showed, interestingly enough, moderate voters, liberal voters in Georgia, even some moderate Republicans, in focus groups said, oh, yeah, they're trying to steal the election. We know what they're up to. So what's interesting is what this could also have an impact of having people surge to the polls to say, they're trying to take it away from us? Oh, hell no. We're going to vote in bigger numbers to make sure that they can't take it away from us. So it's interesting. Look, I'm just telling you, it was interesting to see.
You think there are people who are actively planning not to vote, not but for this arcane matter?
No, I'm saying that there are people who are more motivated to vote, particularly black voters for whom voting in Georgia is really hard sometimes all day.
It's not.
I've been there. It is a long, we have stories of people having to go.
Standing in line for hours.
All over the place.
It's never been easier to vote in America and in Georgia than it is right now.
Well, I'll tell you what.
I hope they don't get thirsty so they don't have to have somebody bring them water.
Exactly.
Come on, guys.
But Scott,
are we going to play this game again?
There's something else I want to ask you about, specifically in Nebraska, because that congressional district, that one electoral vote could prove pivotal in this election. Trump was on a call this week trying to sway Republicans there to change the rules. Shouldn't he just go there and campaign and win it outright instead of trying to change the rules?
Well, I don't know. I mean, it is unusual to do something like this. Of course, it was unusual for Democrats to throw Biden out at the last minute, too. So I guess we're having a summer and fall of unusual activities. It strikes me, what I've heard is that it's not likely to happen. I guess they're trying. And look, I think both campaigns are scraping and clawing for every advantage. You're right, it is pivotal. I still think, if you look at Harris and she were to win the blue wall but loses Sun Belt, she needs that to get to 270. So it is a vital matter for her to be able to compete in that one congressional district. They do it differently there than most other states. So if they changed it, it would bring them in line with most states. But it still seems like it's uphill to change it at this point, but we'll see.
They would wind up sending a tied electoral college to the House.
Yeah.
Trump widely expected to potentially win there.